on part 10 of we're now on part 10 of my time in the CSC with Britain's most dangerous prisoners. And for this episode, I'm going to talk about Danny G. Danny G is quite well known, and his brother Darren. I didn't know Darren that well. I met him, I think I was 15 when I met Darren. I don't think I ever saw him since. But Danny, I knew. I think I first met him when I was about 16. But he's a character in. If you're in YOIs in the 90s in the Northwest in the late 90s, you'd probably have heard his name. We used to hear his name all the time about he's kicked off, he's banged this guy or something like that. And there was a long-running joke with the Manchester guys. We would all claim that all Scousers would name drop Danny G or claim some connection to him at every opportunity. Like, would say that some Scouser claimed that his uncle used to work with someone who lived on the same street as Danny G and stuff like that, or just random exaggerated jokes. But a lot of them did used to always say, just mentioned him all the time to name drop him. And most of the time I met him, it was usually in the Seg. And there was a notorious incident from YOI's time in 97 in Lancaster Farms when he had a fight with a huge Manchester guy called Manny dos Santos. No idea what ever happened to him, but it was one all the Manx claims that Manny won, all the Scousers claimed that he won, but it was like the biggest Manchester guy versus the biggest Scouser, and we all claimed it as a moral victory. Every time later on from when that happened, 98, every time some Scouser name drops Danny G, you'd always hear some voice go, "We got fucking knocked out by Manny dos Santos," and stuff like that. And but I remember asking Danny G years later, like, what happened with that, and he just said it was just a fight that went on forever, and there was no clear winner. But I don't think back then Danny G was used to having fights that lasted that long. He was a huge guy. He just had pure strength. To my knowledge, he's never had any specific fighting ability. I don't think he's a trained boxer. He's just got absolute strength. He's just built like a bear, and he was from a very young age. And I've never even known him to be a proper gym freak. I think he's gone through stages where he's been like hitting the gym. And to go forward, I mean, when he first came to Whitemore, he'd been in the Seg for ages. He's not worked out. He's not done anything for a year. And he just comes in and he's benching 160 kilo when he's been out of the gym. He has bench pressed over 200 kilo. And I used to wind people up. When I was in Hindley, I've got a few times I did this. I'd be new on the wing, and I'd listen out who's talking out the window. And I'd hear a few of my mates or something there. So I just put on a Scouse accent, like with a deliberate, horrible attitude, and like, "Hey, who's that?" And someone's like, "Yo, who's that?" And I was, "Have you got any pain?" And I was like, "Nah." But I'd be hostile and that. I said, "Got no fucking pain. Fucking get in then, you soft lad." And usually you'd have some Manchester guys at the window, "Who the fuck's this dickhead?" I was like, "You what?" And then they'd be all like, "Who's this fucking Scouse prick?" And you'd be about 3 or 4 of them all at the window going mad. And then I'd say, "Don't want to fuck with me, mate, because I know Danny G." And then all hell uproar would break up. And we'd get unlocked for dinner. And I'd come out and say, "Where's this fucking Scouser?" And he was like, "Was it you? Was that fucking you?" Winding me up. And I used to do that quite a few. I just used to do it as an opportunity to take the piss out of the way Scousers used to just name drop Danny G all the time. But most times I'd come across Danny, usually in a Seg in some prison or something like that where he's kicked off. And but when I got to the CSC, Danny G was one of those people. I knew I'd always end up seeing him eventually, but the way people talked about him back in the late 90s, to a lot of people, and especially to a lot of the Scousers, he was like the next Curtis Warren. That's how people used to think. And him and his brother did have a lot of potential back then because they had so much respect and stuff like that. But in the years when I didn't see him, I did not know like what had gone on. I know he'd had involved in scraps and stuff like that. He's been shot. He's supposedly shot people. Him and his brother, Darren, have been up to all kinds of stuff. But it completely passed me by. But when I ended up going to Cat C, the contrast to how they used to be in the 90s, the Scousers, when he talks about him, like you could hardly find one who would say a good word about him. But he did have a lot of enemies. He made a lot of enemies, Danny G did. But he ended up doing an IPP sentence. And he had quite a lot of rampages. And where it all kicked off, because he had a lot of beef with Scousers, a lot of it came from when he gives Sam Cole a good hiding. Sam Cole's, he's a very well-liked person. He's quite a serious guy in Liverpool. He's involved. And he's got his fingers in a lot of pies. But Danny G gave him a good hiding in strange ways, sliding really. But he's made quite a lot of enemies over time. So I remember there was a few lads from who was in strange ways where he's become a Muslim. He's been in dispersal. Something's happened. He's gone on the rounds and he's ended up back in strange ways. And he's had a few more violent episodes. He had a square up in there with a guy called Michael Sharp. Sharp is he's quite well known on in the prison scene. Son of Paul Sykes, former professional boxer. Sharp is he's a known bully. I met him briefly in a seg. He was always all right with me, but people said like you've never lived on the wing with him. He's a bully, people always say bullies pick on the weaker. But in Sharpie's case, pretty much everyone's weaker than him, and he can have a round. But he did get a good hiding in strange ways off a group of Salford lads, and but they squared up. And quite a few people told me that when him and it was over a bench in the gym, Danny and Sharpie squared up, and quite a few people told me that Danny didn't want to have it. Danny backed off. Sharpie was ready for it. He was up for it and stuff like that. He weren't scared of it. People said that Danny backed off, and I did see one episode a few years later with Danny. But I think with me, Danny, he was just I think he was just fed up of the whole, he just wanted to get out by the time when I met him. So when he was becoming a Muslim, and Thomas Pitt was in Strange Ways on the Cat wing at the time, and he started laughing, like, you're a Muslim, and Danny's like, yeah, wallahi, brother, and all this kind of stuff. But it's because he knew he was going back to dispersal. But he ended up going to Full Sutton. I think we're in about 2011, 10 here, something like that. And his mate was a guy called Chris Ashton, or Chris Bodego as he's more commonly known. He's quite a well-known figure, but he's what a lot of the Muslims wanted to do him in. But Danny was his mate, and Yankee was there. Yankee's a black, he's not a Muslim, but there was a bit, I think they kind of bridged the gap, because there was a big firm of Scousers up there, and a big firm of Muslims, and they were but there were a few people who kind of bridged the gap, like Danny G, because he was a Muslim and a Scouser and all that kind of stuff. And the story what Danny told me, I've heard some slightly different versions, but they all kind of meet in the middle. But Danny told me that a lot of the Muslims wanted to do, their main target was Chris Ashton. But Danny G's ended up banging some guy called Keogh from Middlesbrough, and he's down the block. And after he's been down the block, it's all gone off. And Chris Ashton's got done in, a big mob of Muslims and that done him in, it's all gone off. And so when all the Muslims are down the block who've been involved, Danny G started arguing, he started shouting, kicking his door during prayer time and stuff like that, saying all kinds of insulting things about him and stuff like that. So, and the screws get onto all these things. A lot of people start to say, oh, he's on the numbers, he's put himself on the numbers to try and claim some moral victory. But the screws got on all these things. Danny G's been shipped out. I think he went to Leeds, I think he went to Armley, but then he ended up in Loudon Grange. So when he's in Loudon Grange, he's there for about 6 months. And when I saw the CCTV footage of this, he showed it me when I was in Whitemore. So about 6 screws have come to his cell to move him, all with helmets and riot gear on and stuff like that. And when they do that, they have usually a CM, but I'm not sure what they call managers in private jails, at the back filming it. So that's what the CCTV footage. So Danny G's just ended up whacking him. He used the palm of his hand like to whack the screws and stuff like that. And then he had the helmets on. He took the shield off him and just absolutely barged way through like 6 screws in riot gear. And then the other video footage I saw of him was the CCTV footage, and there's no sound on the CCTV footage. And as he's come barging out the cell, I could see him like he's cornered. He's put his hands to the side of the CM, or whatever they called it, stood at one, and he's pointing, but you can't hear what he's saying, and you can see him doing that, pointing around. And in the background, you can see an unconscious screw getting dragged out the cell, like with a full riot gear on and stuff like that. So after that, his card's marked. He's come to the CSC now. He's been in Woodhill for about 6 months. He's progressed to Whitemore about 2013. I'm there in Whitemore with him now. So he's a marked man in dispersal now, and he knows it. But the people who were there at the time, the Muslims, I mean, they are quite serious people who would do him in, but they're all on the verge of progressing through to back to normal location or to Cat Bs in some cases and all that. So no one really wanted to do it, and they're all, there was some talk behind this. On the face of it, they kind of spoke to him and got on with it, but there was a bit of there was some tension in the air. And it all changed. A guy, I'm sure his name was Paul Taylor. I can't remember for life of me. I remember, because he had a name that was very common. But I remember at the time, because I'll come to it in a minute, I mentioned him on another video, but he was a bell end, I thought. He was a white Muslim convert, but he didn't speak to anyone. He only spoke to Muslims. He wouldn't speak to anyone who's not a Muslim. So he's come there. I mean, I did get someone to Google him at the time, and I think he was in for, he got life when he was 16. Him and about 6 people stabbed some fella in London. It was at a time in like 2006 when it just seemed like kids were getting stabbed all the time in London. And he's just caused friction by not speaking. But Danny G used to just get in his face all the time. Like, when we were in the kitchen or something like that. He's like, is that your shit? Is that your fucking stuff there? I'd move it out the fucking way and all that. And he'd get aggressive with him and all that. And then sometimes, but that guy, let's call him Paul Taylor. I think we just go, and stuff like that. He'd just mumble at him and stuff like that. So it wasn't just because of that, because I think this Paul Taylor, he wanted to impress people like Yusuf Patterson and stuff like that who was there. So not long afterwards, Danny G's gone to Strangeways for community visits. Reg Wilson overheard a couple of the prisoners plotting to how they were going to do him in, and some people weren't willing to get involved. But this Paul Taylor, he kind of put himself forward as, I'm going to be the man. And he was about 6'4" and about 11 stone. Danny G would have just crushed his skull in seconds, but he wanted to be trying to gain a bit of credibility with the other Muslims. But Danny G was obviously in Strangeways, but he was like, yeah, well, wallahi, bro, I'm ready for him when he comes back and all this kind of stuff, inshallah, and all this kind of stuff. So, but Reg told me that he's overheard him saying it and stuff like that. He's made a tool out of a lid from a tin of tuna, and he's attached a handle to it, something like that, but he's hidden it in the shower. I mean, he's hidden it in the shower, knowing that Danny G's not going to come back I don't even know why he's made the tool ready when he's not due to come back for about 2 weeks. So this is quite common in prison. When someone says they're going to do someone who's, they don't really stand a chance against them. But what do you quite often do? They'll either shout abuse at that person out the window so all the screws hear it and then don't get unlocked at the same time, or they'll do something like, I remember this happened once when someone took a shank out and it accidentally fell out of his from down his trousers and out of his trouser leg as he was going on the yard, and then you're trying to save face by saying I was going to do it, but the screws foiled my plans, and everyone kind of knows what they're doing. And I think that's what that Paul Taylor did. He made a weapon, hid it in the showers, knowing full well that them showers get searched every day. So when those showers they found that tool. The governor of Whitemore CSC he's a Nigerian guy his name was Odi Jimmy, but he was just known as Governor Jimmy. But when the weapon was found, he was on holiday, so he must have. We just got the memo, whatever it was. The units are locked down, like single exercise until Governor Jimmy gets back and deal with it. Say, for example, it happened on a Wednesday. It was like till next week. So they've got us out, all the screws, got everyone out one by one. This tool's been found. Do you know anyone? Do you know what he was aiming for? Do you feel safe on the wing? Just your standard questions. Everyone said, like, we know nothing about it. So Governor Jimmy's come back on the Monday, and he said, like, certain people can come out together. So I'm out on the yard with Reg Wilson. Yusuf Patterson's coming out with Ovi Peddy and Dean Cullen, and Adrian Hilton was another Muslim guy on there. So, I think they kind of knew. Someone must have said. So, and that Paul Taylor, I can't even remember if he was coming out with it. So, I remember one day on the yard, I'm on the yard with Reg Wilson. I'm at Yusuf Patterson's window, just chatting to him on the yard. And the CM, the manager of the unit, was a guy called Steve Machin. And if anyone who's been to Whitemore might remember him, he's a really nice bloke. A lot of people think he's mixed race, but his family's actually Australian Aborigine. So he said, right, Robbie, come here, what's what word you are? And I thought, the governor's back now. I remember this Tuesday, 2nd September 2014. I remember this date. So he's called me in, and I just thought it was to speak about, the same thing, the lockdown, the weapon, what's been found. And he's took me towards my cell. And there was an officer there called Caroline West. Caroline West was quite a divisive officer. She's very girly. Like, it's one of those type of women, if you met her, like on the outside, and you said, what do you do for a living? And she said, I'm a prison officer in a maximum security prison. You just laugh and say, no, come on, what do you really do? You'd expect her to be like a primary school teacher or something, the way she was. But she stood outside my door with a big smile on her face. And she pulled, when you can't, you have a red door card. She pulled me red door card and said, do you want to rip it up? And took me a second to realise I've just come off Cat A in the CS Unit, which is pretty much unheard of. And a week later, on the 9th September, Danny G's come back and I've gone to Strangeways in return. But a few months later, Danny G would come to Strangeways while I'm there for his trial for the assault on the screws in Loudon Grange. And that's when I started to realise about Danny G, because Andy Shack was in the SEG at the time, and I just assumed that they'd be mates or something like that. But when I got to Strangeways, there was quite a few people from the northwest that obviously their side, who's at Whitemore and that. And I'd say, yeah, Danny G's there, and pretty much everyone's like, oh, that fucking rat, that fucking dirty twat and all that. And then I thought, whoa, fucking times have changed from how it was in the 90s when he was like fucking hero worshipped and all that. And Andy Shack didn't speak to him, and there was another scouser there called Spanner who just like started trying to provoke him. Like when other scousers were going, guess who's down here? That fucking rat Danny G, stuff like that. And Danny G didn't come to his door, and that's when I started thinking, I don't want to slag the guy off. I mean, if Danny G got out next week and messaged me and said, you want to go for a drink, I'd go for a drink for him. I'm beyond all that kind of who's a rat and I couldn't care less or anything like that. But to me, it was a bit of a case of like, how the mighty have fallen or something like that. But when I was in Cat C, but a lot of people have said this, because when I was in Cat C, a lot same there. Most Scousers, I've not got a good word to say about him. A lot of them seem to dislike Darren more. But you get a few people like this in jail. A lot of people say if Danny G was here now, no one would say anything. But the second he was gone, they'd be all slagging him off. And I've seen that with a few people. There are a few people in a prison service like that. And a few years later, because he got deselected in the CSC and he was in Strange Ways, and he let himself go. He was on the spice and everything, and he was just kind of. And I think it's a shame to see how someone, you know, who had a big status from back in the day, just completely let himself go smoking spice. People used to say he was smoking during the daytime and just conk out, lying on the pool table and stuff like that. Little idiots and that, taking the piss, taking liberties with him and, you know, stuff like that. And obviously he did progress to open prison more recently. I think that was last year, but then he ended up absconding. He probably had a piss test and knew he was going to fail, so just thought, fuck it, I'm off. And he was found in Wigan. But what tends to happen with that, what not a lot of people know, especially with IPPs, when you do go to Cat D, by the time you come up for your next parole, because if you're Cat D, you've deemed to have pretty much reduced your risk. And this happens to quite a lot of people. You abscond from Cat D or you get kicked out of Cat D. Especially if you absconded, you can't go back for something like 2 or 3 years. So by the time you get your next parole, you can't go to Cat D. So most of the time, you're just getting straight released. And I've seen that happen to quite a lot of people who have absconded from Cat D, and by the time they've had the next parole, they're just released. So it is very likely that Danny G will be back on the streets within a couple of years.